I work at a pizza shop on the weekends, just outside of Jackson County, Florida. It's a small, family-owned business that does really well, since they're the only pizza shop around. It's a pretty small town, but I make great money as a driver, especially for only working on the weekends. A few months ago, I was out doing deliveries on a Saturday night. It had been pouring all night, and I kept getting flash flood warnings on my phone, but the orders were coming in non-stop, so I was pretty much the man of the hour. Being the only driver for the night, I had zero downtime from the start of my shift. It was around 11 o'clock, and I had just gotten back from a delivery. As soon as I walked inside, another box was sitting on the counter, all ready to go. Without taking any time, I grabbed the box and walked out to my car. I was in a great mood that night, making almost double the money I'd usually make. I punched the address into my Google Maps and started heading there. It was only 15 minutes away, and I remember delivering to this house once or twice before. When I was about 5 minutes away, I turned down a long stretch of road that sat between fields of crops on one side and houses on the other. So, as I was making my way down this road, I spotted a car that appeared to be broken down on the side by the cornfields. Although it was hard to see with all the rain on the windows of my car, I was able to make out a male figure standing by the hood. I slowed down, trying not to completely soak him as I passed. But as I neared him, he sat down in the puddle by the road and buried his head between his knees. It seemed like he was pretty upset, so the good person inside me decided to pull over to see if I could help him out. I threw on my hazards and pulled up on the side of the road, just in front of his car. Trying not to get soaked, I quickly got out and ran over to him and asked if he was alright. He didn't respond to me at all, but looked up at me with a really weird smile, almost like it was fake. I repeated myself, thinking he must not have heard me, but again, he just held this really creepy grin. I was instantly weirded out, so I turned to walk back to my car. Just as I got in, I heard a loud thump and felt my entire car shake, followed by a loud scream. The guy had jumped on top of my car and was pounding on the roof. It all happened so fast and was all totally unexpected. Before I knew it, the guy had jumped down from my car and was pounding at the driver's side window with a knife. I only saw him for a brief second, but he had a look of madness on his face. Terrified, I started my car, but just before I was about to put it in drive, the guy had punched through the glass with his knife, narrowly missing my head. I screamed, flooring it out of there, not even thinking about the chances of hydroplaning off the road. Thankfully, I made it a pretty good distance down the road, and I picked up my phone to call the police. As I was on the phone with the operator, I saw a woman holding a baby, walking down the side of the road with their sweater pulled over each of their heads. I instantly thought back to the car, so I rolled down the window next to her and asked if that was her car that broke down a couple miles back. She said yes, so I asked her if she knew who that guy was. She looked at me with a dumbfounded look, then replied, "What guy?" I quickly explained everything to her, that showed I was on the phone with the police. I offered to take her to a gas station down the road to get further away, and also to get them out of the rain, so she agreed and got in with her baby. We drove a couple more miles down the road until we pulled into a gas station and waited for the police. When one of the cops arrived, he took down our information and I gave him my statement. They told us they'd check it out and let us know if anything comes up. By now, I was already 40 minutes late to my delivery, but I still decided to drop it off anyway, since I was only a couple minutes away. I called my boss and told him what had happened, telling him that I was done for the night after this drop-off. I went home that night with a busted driver's side window, a scratched up car, and a ton of fear, but I was happy that I didn't get killed by that psycho. I assumed he was on drugs, but I'm not sure. It's been the only reasonable conclusion I could come up with. I heard back the next morning from the police that the guy was gone by the time they arrived, which was really unfortunate to hear. I'm not sure where that guy came from, or if he's still out there in those fields, but I hope he's eventually caught. I'd like to think that my family and I are always prepared when it comes to keeping the house safe. We live in a pretty safe area, where crime isn't much of an issue, but we'd like to think that we could have just about everything anyone could ever need in the case of a dangerous situation. My husband has been with the police force for almost the past 2 decades, so naturally, he's insistent about keeping our home secure. We have several guns that we keep in a couple different spots throughout the house, along with our retired police dog, Apollo. So, as you can imagine, we all feel pretty safe. My husband had been put on nights for the past couple weeks to fill in for his buddy, who was out of commission for a couple months after undergoing a medical procedure. On this night, I was home alone with my 6-year-old daughter, Gia. I had put her to sleep around 9:30, and I was in the living room watching TV with Apollo as the rain poured outside. To keep him healthy, I've always tried to walk him as much as possible, even if it was just for a little bit. At some point, the rain had slowed down to a drizzle, so I decided I'd take him for a quick walk to the end of the street to burn off some energy before bed. I grabbed Apollo's leash as he squealed with excitement, and we made our way outside. Once we made it a couple houses down, Apollo started barking like crazy in the direction of our neighbor's backyard. I tried to get him to stop, but it seemed like no matter how hard I tried, he wouldn't give it up. Our neighbors have a pretty big backyard, about the same size as ours, so I was under the impression that either the neighbor was outside or there was just an animal roaming around. We kept walking, but as we continued on, Apollo kept turning back and looking towards the neighbor's house. He was starting to freak me out, given his experience in the police force, so I turned around to head back home shortly after. I was relieved to see that Apollo wasn't barking anymore as we passed the neighbor's backyard on the way back, after probably waking up the entire neighborhood. When we got back inside the house, I laid back down on the couch, and Apollo went about his normal business, drinking water and eating from his food bowl in the kitchen. I guess I ended up passing out on the couch, because I was awakened at some point in the night to Apollo growling. It took me a second to wake up, until I heard him growling again. I rubbed my eyes, and checked my phone to see that it was 1:30 a.m. I muted the TV, trying to figure out what his deal was, until I realized he was upstairs. Any fatigue I felt before that was instantly gone, and I ran up to go check it out. When I found Apollo, he was standing in one of the guest bedrooms, growling at the window. His hair was spiked up along his back, so something definitely spooked him. I looked out the window, trying to figure out what he saw, but there was nothing. The window faces towards the garage, which is connected on a lower level to the upstairs of the house, so all I could really see was the roof of the garage. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary, but I definitely felt worried, since it was now the second time he'd been growling at seemingly nothing. I sat down on the bed, trying to pet him so he'd calm down. Shortly after, I got up to go to my room and hopefully fall back asleep, leaving Apollo alone in the guest bedroom. Within seconds after my head hit the pillow in bed, Apollo started going crazy. Startled, I flew out of bed to see what he was barking at, but once again, I still couldn't figure out why. That's when I heard a loud thump. It seemed like it came from outside, but it sounded close. That set Apollo off again, and I started to get worried that something was seriously wrong. Apollo's barking and growling woke up Gia in her room, which was directly behind the guest bedroom. She yelled for me, and I quickly ran in, followed by Apollo. She was obviously freaked out, and I tried to calm her down, but Apollo would not stop barking. This time, he was facing Gia's window, which also pointed towards the garage. Beyond being confused and startled, I got up to pull back the curtains on Gia's window, and what I saw on the other side made me scream and almost fall back. There was a masked person standing on top of our garage, looking through the window, with both hands pressed up against it. By this point, I was screaming, Gia was screaming, and Apollo was practically foaming at the mouth. As soon as the person saw me, they disappeared, where I assumed that they jumped off the roof of the garage. I ran back into my room and grabbed the 12-gauge shotgun from under the bed and called the police. Also wanting to alert my husband, I got off the phone after giving dispatch the address, and I called him. He works in a district over, but told me he was on his way when he heard the chaos in the background. Well, shortly after, the police arrived, followed by my husband, who showed up in his patrol car. They searched the entire property for the suspect, but he was gone. It was determined that he used our trash cans on the side of the house to climb up on the garage. As they continued investigating, they found that there was no apparent sign of breaking and entering, and the locks to the doors remained undamaged. However, footprints were found in our backyard that led through several of our neighbors, including the backyard of the house that Apollo was barking at. The worst part of all is that we still have no idea who it was, or what they were trying to do. My husband and I, along with the police, have a strong feeling that it was someone we knew. The fact that they were standing right outside Gia's window in the middle of the night while my husband was working gives us all a sickening feeling. It certainly seemed to be planned out to an extent, meaning that they would have had to observe our routines beforehand in order to pick the time where they'd be least likely to get caught. I'm not sure if we'll ever find out, and unfortunately, we still live in fear. We're now extra cautious of any adults being around Gia, and we've since added a home security system. If we didn't have Apollo, I can't even begin to imagine what would have happened to my daughter, given that I was sleeping on the couch in the living room. Who knows? Maybe it was just a freak coincidence, and a random person decided to try to break in through my daughter's window. But I have a bad feeling that it wasn't. This story happened quite a while ago, but it's something that'll always be imprinted in my mind. In the second half of 1998, I had taken a job as a security guard at a plant that made locks. I usually worked one of 3 shifts, either 4 p.m. to 12 a.m., 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., or 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. The 7:30 to 3:30 shift was for extra coverage, so there were always 2 of us there from 7:30 to midnight. It was a routine, boring job for the most part. We did our rounds, logged anything out of the ordinary, and watched a tiny monitor displaying the CCTV feed. Things went by in an almost painfully normal manner for 6 months. I worked, saved up, bought a car, and planned to move. By late March of 1999, I served my notice and prepared to head cross-country. A new hire was brought in to fill my spot. He was a soft-spoken man named Calvin. As part of his training, Calvin spent time working at all hours. At night, he was a shadow, working with myself and the other night guard, getting a feel for the plant's nocturnal routines. Most nights, he worked with myself and Amira, a female guard who was around my age. I was 18 at the time. Calvin, who was about a decade older, was quiet and polite, though something seemed to be missing with him. There's a spark that genuinely nice people seem to have, and he didn't possess it. Whenever he went on rounds with me, he'd ask questions about the job and make small talk. I noticed that he was a little odd, laughing at odd times and changing his tone mid-sentence. At the time, I just chalked it up to him being awkward, but that wouldn't last. One night, near the end of his first week, he went on rounds with Amira. When they returned to the office, I knew something was wrong. Normally talkative, Amira barely said a word. Not sure what had occurred, I waited until Calvin had gone to the restroom to ask. She explained that during their trip, everything had been normal until they reached the brass mill, a portion of the plant that shut down at 6 p.m. There were usually no employees there after that time, and no lights. They were making their way to a checkpoint on a landing atop a flight of stairs when the mood shifted. She told me that she turned around, only to find that he was standing inches away from her. Startled, she backed up against the grating at the end of the landing, and he leaned in towards her, his face nearly touching hers. He flirted with her in a low and creepy voice. Freaked out, she told him to stop and mention his wedding band, in which he replied, saying that it would be over soon. From then on, I did the rounds, taking Calvin with me each time. The night ended without further incident, and I left a note for our supervisor detailing what had occurred. Well, the next night came, and there was no Calvin. I did the rounds, while Amir stayed in the locked office. This continued for several nights, and Calvin had seemingly dropped off the face of the planet. Then, on my second to last shift, I came in to find her freaking out. When I asked what was wrong, she said she found out why Calvin hadn't been at work. He had been arrested for murdering his wife. She had been dismembered and burned, and parts of her body were placed in a pond less than a mile from where we worked. That night and the next, Amir called the jail just to make sure they were still holding him. Based on the time frame, he had killed his wife months before he started the job.